Over these last days, the metaphor of making soup has been used, and we've added ingredients to our pot, we've turned up the heat, and we've added several herbs and spices. But when a soup is cooked, we usually taste it to see whether it needs any further salt. There's an old story of Mullah Nasruddin, well known by some. And it's that time when Mullah Nasruddin would every day go to the coffee shop to meet with his friends, sitting at a little table outside. Every day, at a certain moment, a little boy would come along and knock Mullah Nasruddin's turban off so that it rolled into the street. And every day, one of the Mullah's friends would say to him, "Why don't you punish that little brat of a child?" And the Mullah said, "Wait, there is another power at play here." A few days later, Mullah Nasruddin and his friends came to the coffee shop to find that their table was occupied by a big, strapping soldier, wearing on his head a shining helmet with a tassel coming out of its top. And as they stood there, right on time, the little boy came along and, out of habit, knocked the helmet of the soldier off his head, so it went rolling down into the gutter. In the flash of an instant, the soldier had taken out his sword and lopped the little boy's head right off his shoulders. And the Mullah turned to his companions and said, "You see, I told you that there was another power at play here." On the very first night we were together, when a few of us had already arrived, a story was told that brings our circle closed, so to speak. And it's that story about yogis. Now we know that yogis, in their state of attainment, acquire certain extraordinary powers called siddhis. Now there is one such great yogi who, known by the Sufis, is called Isa, but to most of us he's known as Jesus. And just after Isa had attained to yogihood, he was walking down the road one day when he saw a young man sitting sobbing, weeping by the side of a newly dug grave. When Isa went over to him, having a wave of great compassion come over him, he asked the young man why he was weeping so. The young man said, "This is my bride. We have just been married, and her life has been taken away from me." Now we know that several of Isa's powers were to turn water into wine and to bring the dead to life. So with great compassion he did so. He returned the bride to a state of life. The husband was overjoyed, and they resumed their connubial bliss. But it so happened that one day the young couple sat to rest under a tree, and the husband, feeling fatigued, lay down and put his head on the knees of his beloved wife and went into a deep, peaceful sleep. But as it happened, a prince came riding by on a great stallion, and the eyes of the prince and the eyes of the bride met, and instantly there was a lustful connection. And so the wife, gently taking her husband's head off her lap and laying it on the ground, she climbed up behind the prince on his stallion, and they rode off. Now when the husband awoke, he was distressed to find that his bride was no longer there. He had lost her yet again. So he went seeking for her, going into town, asking everyone he met, until someone pointed to the garden of the palace. And when the young husband went over and looked, there was his wife in the arms of the prince in a close embrace. Now, as it happened, Isa came by, and seeing the situation, the young man pleaded with him. So they went, and they asked the bride. The husband saying, "You are my bride, my wife." And she said, "I've never seen you before in my life." So Isa, knowing the situation, also asked her, and she again denied knowing the husband to whom she was wed. From this, Isa learned a great lesson. Not only did he return the bride to the state of absence of breath, so that she had to be returned to her grave, but never again did he react to the emotions of compassion, pity, empathy, love. And finally, there's the story of the monk who had been in the monastery for 25 years. He'd attained a great state of piety. He knew the rituals well. He knew the chants. He knew the tenets. the teachings of the faith, but he had not attained liberation. Many who had seen him and who knew him wondered why. He had all the qualities that seemed to equal a state of realization, and yet it was absent from him. One day the abbess of the monastery called him to her, and she said, "You have not attained because you still have attachment. There is only one thing left for you to do, and that is to pass through the red door." Now, this red door led into a room, unknown by any of the others in that monastery, but each and every one of them feared what was behind that door, even evading walking by it when they passed it in the cloisters. The seeker's heart rose. At last, I will attain freedom, liberation. And so the abbess took his hand, led him down to the cloister and to the door, and as they stood outside the door, she said to him, "There is only one thing that you need to do, and that is to cross the room to the door that leads on the other side, to make your exit." And then, with her key drawn from her robe, she opened the door and pushed the seeking monk inside, closing the door and turning the key. When the monk's eyes grew accustomed to the darkness of the room, he saw that he was standing on a narrow ledge, and between that ledge and the door that could be seen on the other side was a gaping abyss, a void. And as he stood, pushing his back into the door with fear because the ledge was so narrow, he imagined that he could hear the thundering sounds deep, deep beneath in that great gaping void. Fear gripped him, such as he'd never experienced before. As he gazed, he could see into its depths and hear the sounds that arose. For one whole day, he quaked and shivered. On the second day, he banged on the door, begging to be let out. On the third day, weary, it seemed that his past passed before his eyes, and he was bereft, empty, empty. empty, and yet still he wept. But he remembered then what the old abbess had said. Cross the room to the other door to make your exit. Exhausted and hungry, he had no other choice but to step out into that abyss. And when he did, his foot fell on solid ground, still trembling and waiting, but step by step, the path opened up to him, and suddenly he was in front of the other door. What does this story mean for us? The questions that have been asked, that were the theme for our coming here, was to learn and perhaps to experience what it is that remains when human loves have played themselves out for us, and what is the absence of illusion. Perhaps with these stories, and leaving them in the place where at the end of this last tale we've crossed the abyss, the void, and come to the door. To where does it lead? And perhaps you'll forgive this old storyteller, because I have to leave the way open to come back again.